So hello and welcome everyone again to SDLT 5. So today we've got with us Katrina, and Katrina has been involved in the blockchain industry both here in Australia and globally since 2015. She is a CEO and founder of Civic Ledger and probably other companies as well. But anyway, she's done great things and she's been driving the responsible usage and adoption of blockchain technology. And so she's here today to try and tell us about how we can have do transactions and how we can use that to make the work of government and business better. So how we can improve things using blockchain and essentially moving away from the hype cycle and getting into the reality cycle. Over to you, Katrina.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's great to be here in person. I would like to begin this morning again by recognising and acknowledging the Turrbal and Jagera people, the traditional custodians of the land to which we're meeting here today. And I'd like to pay my respects to the ancestors, the elders, past, present, and also those emerging leaders. Now, who's managing my PowerPoint presentation today? So am I just clicking through?
Yeah, it should be just as normal. Okay. Let me see if we can go full screen.
So just hit the button across.
Yeah.
Okay. So the focus of my presentation today is around data exchanges. Like trading shares on the Australian Security Exchange, could data also be traded? The problem is data is non-fungible. And like share markets or exchange, they work more efficiently when there is fungibility and liquidity. Despite this challenge, in the past year or so, we are seeing a growing narrative around data exchanges. Even though Australia's first data exchange, privately funded data exchange, Data Republic, which was founded in 2018, it went into administration this year, citing COVID and running out of a runway after raising $33 million. So whilst Data Republic was given a lifeline, to say went out to market once the administrators came in and sold their intellectual property and their technology they had, they're still going. But it started to make me wonder, is data exchanges our future? And is there a role for blockchain and smart contracts? So a little bit about me. Peter was very generous in sort of introducing me. Yes, I feel like I'm been around for so long. As you can see, back in 2016, my hair is in a different place as well. But I'd like to introduce myself. I am CEO and co-founder of Civic Ledger. We were founded in late 2016 after working with the Queensland government on exploring whether blockchain technology could solve the problem of the double spend of a government issued credential. This exploration was very early. It was so early and so far that we developed our solution on the Bitcoin blockchain using Colorcoin. And for those in the room that remember those days, that was very, very interesting because we were able to actually code the credential to do things through the transaction. But what we learned in those days, that there were use cases beyond finance, which was the dominant discussion around then. You've got to remember back in 2016, the banks were coming together, building consortiums, going private, and having ambitions of being able to share data with each other, but they're not necessarily here anymore. So over the years, I've been involved in the Australian blockchain industry in various roles. One of the things I'm very proud of is that I brought the Australian Women in Blockchain chapter to Australia from New York and set up the first Brisbane Women Blockchain meetup and held that for about 3 years, interviewed some incredible women in this industry. I'm a former member of Blockchain Australia, former member of RMIT, a Blockchain Australian Fellow, and in 2018 we were awarded, very strangely, Australian Emerging FinTech Company of the Year. We're a blockchain company, not FinTech, but we took the award. We were very, very grateful. But let's go back to the future because I want to contest. I'm going to contest Peter because this isn't the 5th SDLT Symposium, it's number 6. And I remember because I was there. And I was very lucky to be in a room because, which I'll explain in a little bit, but to qualify early that my presentation is not about going under the hood. I know a lot of you are going to go under the hood today, but what my role here today is really posing an observation. There's been, 6 years is a long time in this industry, and there's always things that I observe. So, but this is precisely why we have these symposiums, because even though you may disagree with some of my observations, we're here to have some rigorous debate. We have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to challenge each other and disagree and push this technology. So 2016, these were the themes in 2016. I remember Professor John Flood standing up in this little room, Griffith University at South Bank in Brisbane. In this tiny room, there was only a small group of us, and we started talking about these concepts of trust, governance, what is blockchain technology and smart contracts. So we had Professor John Flood, we have Mutu, who's here today, Tim Cadman, Adrian McCullough, who's going to be speaking later today. And there were 4 themes, as I said: trust, governance, blockchain technology, and smart contracts. And this was 2016. So it was, what was so fascinating was just how homogeneous all these concepts were. There was the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain. We were yet to have the DAO, for all of those who remember the DAO when Ethereum forked in 2017. I remember reading backfeeds, Martin Field and Primavera de Filippi were writing about DAO papers way back in 2016, 2015. Smart contracts were, as Adrian McCullough would say, are neither smart nor a contract. There were no ICOs, and government governance was a duopoly between private and permissioned or public and permissionless. Those were the frameworks that we were working back then. And dare I say, what was the value of BTC in 2016? Do I have any takers? It was $700. Yes, $700 way back in those days. But here we are. 2021, what has changed? What have we started to see now around these concepts? And it's interesting, even though what was once homogeneous no longer is, but is it really? So while we're still having the same conversations around trust, trustlessness, trustless, we're seeing more conversations around governance, which excites me because I'm a sociologist. And this is the reason why I got into this business, is because I always saw blockchain technology as a governance technology. It's about how we reorganize society, how we reorganize economics. So we've moved away from governance around permissioned and permissionless as duopoly and brought in things such as privacy, consensus, security, democracy, transparency. And smart contracts have been given many more different names now. Now we see a thing called automatic logic or RegTech, as we're seeing more and more these days through the Productivity Commission. And we're having a much more blockchain systems beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum. And what is the price of Bitcoin now? I'll leave that to the audience to ponder. So what has changed? Have we really hit mainstream? If you saw yesterday's paper, for those that are in Australia, in yesterday's headline, the Australian Financial Review on the front page in 2021 said you'd be thinking, yes, we have. There was Senator Jane Hume declared that crypto was no longer a fad and we had to get used to it. This is fascinating to go back to 2016 when we're in a small room looking at each other going, what do we have in our hands and what does the future evolve? Now we're in 2021 and we have these things. I call them the best sellers because we can't turn anywhere anymore these days without seeing these words everywhere. We're still seeing the Australian Securities Exchange forging ahead with their DLT replacement of chess. They've now brought VMware to Australia. DAML is a theme. NFTs seem to have emerged as a killer app, even though nobody cares about decentralization. And the Australian government have published the Steering Committee report to position Australia as a financial and technology hub with a recommendation that DAOs are to be recognised under the Corporations Act. Now think about that. We've gone from 2017 when we had forking of Ethereum to today our Australian government pushing a recommendation that DAOs are recognised in law. This is phenomenal. It's going to change things so much. And we saw Venezuela adopt Bitcoin as a legal currency. And because Venezuela adopted Bitcoin as a legal currency, it requires us to change our legislation. I wonder if that will happen. Ethereum 2 is still coming, and apparently so is central bank digital currencies. Yet some things remain the same. We get very excited in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrency and all of this thing because we think that we're already here and we're waiting for the world to catch up. Then we get reminded about a few things. That we almost exist in a parallel universe. Every day we are swamped with accounts of fake news, misinformation, disinformation, data breaches, data theft, hacks. And the world's richest men are building rockets and leaving the earth. And now we have Meta. Are we here yet? Are we a mainstream? Or are we still thinking perhaps soon? Now, amongst all this noise, something extraordinary happened in the last 2 weeks. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to what happened. But I don't know if you noticed, but a private company and a country have been offered $1 billion by the same company for something in exchange. And this is really, really, really interesting. What happened in the last 2 weeks is outstanding, well, extraordinary, phenomenal. That company is Google. Google will pay the CEM group. Now, if you don't know who the CME is, it's the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. We're talking about an exchange that is trillions of transactions of value every day. They are paying the CME to go to Google Cloud. They're paying them $1 billion. At the same time, Google will pay the Australian government $1 billion to move its services to the cloud. Now think about this for one moment. A private company is valued at $1 billion and our country $1 billion. Private company, public country, same value. I'm going to leave that with you. So is this transaction about outdoing AWS or Azure, or is it about data and lots and lots and lots of data? I like this picture. It's sort of like optimistic but pessimistic at the same time. So imagine in the future when Google owns everything that we do. Like this dog, the dog owner, will we be waiting for our see our data increase in value, or will be waiting for a very, very long time? Google know that the future will be about how valuable data will be. And they've just paid $1 billion to our government. A very, very shrewd deal indeed. Very cheap deal. And this happened when nobody was watching. So big data and shared data. Now, I know over the years, for people who are my age, and we've seen, this conversation around data for years and years and years, saying it's coming, it's coming. We all agree that data is crucial to the proper functioning of the current and the future digital society. It's fundamental to the day-to-day running of societies, governments, and businesses. And we all understand that data increases in value when combined across domains and verticals and previously unconsidered insights that can be obtained when data is combined. But why now? Why are we seeing Google and these big conglomerates coming in and wanting to pay substantial amounts of money to get data into their clouds? I think we've been hearing for decades that data will be the next oil, and what we've witnessed in the last 2 years is unprecedented. There has been an acceleration of all things digital beyond our wildest dreams. And as a result, governments globally are under pressure to move more quickly and provide better services to its citizens. Hence Google coming along and helping our government out. But what is a data exchange? To me, it actually is this picture. It's very much the way it is working right now. It is about people agreeing about what data is and how we actually agree on its rules to share it. But according to Wikipedia, it's an exchange, a process of taking data structured under a source schema and transforming it into a data schema so data has an accurate representation of the source data. It allows data to be shared between different computer programs. So for those in Australia, you're already participating in a data exchange. You may not know it, but you are. So for all those ones, particularly me, my company, for example, I have a business. For me to participate in my government services that I need to be compliant on the Corporations Act, I need to have a MyGov ID. My company needs to have that. As a result, I'm also identified, the company's identified through my relationship authorization manager. But we also have this thing called a data exchange, which is run by our Department of Social Services. And this is a service that is about departments sharing your data across departments. So it's about an internal system or internal protocol between government departments on how to share your data. So we actually are actors in this exchange already, but we may not know it. So as I mentioned at the start, Data Republic saw a future where data would need to be shared across financial systems. And they started working with the big banks. They did, and AWS, to solve the problem of how to securely share this data and reduce the counterparty risk. So it was actually, I said it was so interesting that they did call it in May 21, and they were acquired. So obviously there is still an appetite for the data, for these data exchanges. But there are pros and cons with this. And I would have to say that the interesting thing about these exchanges that we currently have today are around about personal data. It's about data about ourselves. It's not about data around things or assets or digital, it's about us. And as a result, we're having these things done to us without us really knowing. And, you know, obviously we hit the T's and C's when we go into these systems, but we really don't really know just how powerful these exchanges are. So these are all about personal data. But what I wanted to really set the scene up is to say, what if we move beyond personal data? What do we think about how data is to be articulated, how it's actually to be agreed, and what are those rules for sharing that data? So what would we be exchanging and why? Always love this picture. So I'm just going to, for the last part of my presentation, because I'm probably getting close to finishing, but I wanted to take you through to some really world that we're working in right now. As Peter mentioned, we've been around for a long time, and as we started in the early days around credentialing and we started moving into marketplaces and things like that, now we're heading into year 6, and finally the world is changing, just like the internet was in 1997 when we finally got it indexed. But what we will see in the future, and this is what we've been seeing on our radar for some time, and you can't go anywhere now without seeing ESG, environmental, social governance. You hear the words greenwashing, and now how this world is becoming extremely valuable because of ESG. The challenge is that this is about data, but more importantly, it's about credentials. And why is it really important? It's because it's what we call now an ethical credential. And if we're able to articulate what that ethical credential is, it becomes highly valuable in marketplaces. Let me explain. For most of you in this room who are based here in Australia, you maybe have been tracking the Australian government. Last year, they issued a grant, well, earlier this year, they issued a grant program called the Critical Minerals Project. There was 2 projects. There was one about looking at critical minerals, and the other one was looking at excise tax in beer. Very interesting. Anyway, we are part of the Critical Minerals Project working with Everledger. And the whole reason for this project is the question is, how do we enable our critical minerals industry to remain globally competitive under the guise of sustainability? Now, for us in the room, knowing that mining industries in this country are largely, are they ethical? Are they sustainable? Are they environmental? Are they transparent? But what's happening now is there's a massive shift. Industries now need to be able to tell their stories. But those stories are not attached to them as people. They're attached to what they do. what they extract, when they extract it, how they extract it, how it moves across the supply chain. And because we're working with Everledger, for those who know in the room, they are also a blockchain company led by Leanne Kemp. And their expertise is provenance. So they got early in the early days around diamonds and assets of value, and they always knew that provenance mattered way back in 2015. And here we are sitting in 2021, working together on how to actually bind data to site and to a batch to verify its ethical credential, to prove its provenance, to prove its state, to prove its assertions around its conduct or its behavior. Now, why that is interesting, because if we're able to reveal the state of the site and the batch of the critical mineral, we're able to garnish a higher yield in the markets, because markets want to know, manufacturers want to know. They want to know, what am I getting? Because if I get the highest price or the highest value, I know I'm able to meet my requirements around disclosure. And this is very exciting, because all of a sudden, data is no longer about your personal data. It's about what we do. It's about how we behave, how we govern ourselves. And this data is going to become highly valuable in two-sided markets when we need to determine which product is going to go into that electric vehicle battery and which products won't, because they'll be graded around credentials. So what I'm talking about here is, in effect, is a digital twin. Not a digital twin in the essence of a BIM, like a building information management system where you take a 3D render of a model building. What I'm talking about is how data becomes inseparable from the asset, and then how it becomes discoverable in different verticals of different industries, such as finance, disclosure, all those sort of things. And we're hitting that as a tipping point. But the challenge is how do we solve that problem? And I know all of you in this room, if we go back to my presentation, my slide about, what's news right now, bridges, data bridges. How do we move data from one ledger to another ledger, ensure the integrity of that data so it becomes, keeps its state as it moves through a supply chain. So what we see, the more fidelity in the data, highest value. So the second thing that is becoming really, really interesting from our observation is consent. So consent is also, or is it, a new player in these data markets in the way we exchange data? And if you go back to the way the exchanges are being constructed today, consent is not a price. Consent is also considered as, well, you're participating, so we have your consent to do what we like with your data. What we're looking at from our perspective is, how do our blockchain solutions, through the work we do and the way we design, build into our governance systems consent? How do we ensure that if our data is moving through state, it's moving through supply chains, that the owner of that data is consenting to how it is used in marketplaces to create value? And this is very, very interesting. So when we go right back to the early days of 2016, when we were looking at it from a homogeneous perspective, things have become a lot more complex, but much more exciting, because we're actually asking ourselves, what does this all mean? And I think what we're seeing with the NFTs is, for the first time, I think what we're seeing with NFT explosion is art is merely the means to an end. It's the thing that gets us to the thing. The real value is the ability to assert ownership of the digital asset and enable the sharing of its value with others. The exchange between the owner and the beneficiary is one based on consent, trust, and transparency, as the ledger is an independent system of record enabling independent probity. When we look at these data exchanges that are being built currently, there is no capacity for us to have independent probity. We don't know where the data is coming from. We don't know who has it, what value is being created. So the difference is the value is shared amongst the exchange's participants. Value is not extracted by one entity at the cost of others. And that, what I find really, really exciting. But as we have to keep holding ourselves accountable, not everything needs a blockchain, everybody. And those are the things we also need to hold ourselves accountable. Just because we can, should we? Just because we can, should we? And that's, again, that's where my philosophy and my ethics background kicks in. When I challenge my team and I say, you know, just because we might be able to go hardcore into DeFi and build out books and things like that, we have to be continually aware of our customers and who we're solving problems for. So this gets to my final notes, and I know I'm probably gone over time, but smart contracts. Whilst not smart or not a contract, which I know Adrian will be speaking about this afternoon, are extremely, extremely interesting when designing blockchain systems to support the exchange of value between issuers and beneficiaries. So I'm excited about what happens next, but we always must be pragmatic and understand and acknowledge that there is a transition phase required. And that's what sometimes we forget. We forget that we are already here. Why isn't everybody hurrying up? Get to this over this part of the bridge already, please. But the problem is the transition between Web 2 and Web 3 is not instantaneous. Just because we're all today and ready for the W3 future, we need to have things called infrastructure built around us, just like the internet did in 1997 when it finally got indexed. Before that, nobody could find each other. But what we're seeing now is the right infrastructure getting thought about. How do we share data across different protocols? How do we understand governance? And we're seeing government now stepping in and understanding that they have to think about regulatory frameworks to enable this infrastructure to come forward. So for me, when we're sitting now in 2021, going into 2022, and we have to deliver our critical minerals project next year, and we'll be rolling out the water work that everybody knows that we do, we'll be starting to roll that out across Northern Australia. I'm confident and really quite excited that perhaps 2022 will mark the beginning of a whole new adventure for us. So when we're at Symposium 10, and we reflect on what Symposium 6 or 5, depending on who you are, where we come from again, I wonder if we will still be talking about trust and governance and blockchain systems and smart contracts. And I think we will, because they are the fundamentals of what we have to keep on asking ourselves about. That's why we exist. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone for enabling or allowing me to speak this morning and share my observations. Some of you may disagree with me, and I think that's great because we have to have these rigorous debates. But I wanted to say thank you to Peter and especially to Mutu. Thank you so much for having me here today and for allowing me to speak. Thank you, everyone.
We have time for just one question.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Katrina. Good to see as usual and to remind half a decade of travel outside the world. Now, congratulations on the project, $3 million, Richard.
Oh, we're a small player in a very big project, but it is.
My question is that what's the future and what as a company?
Sure. So Mutu's just asked me. Mutu is has been alongside me for the last 6 years. He asked me about what do we need around, what does that future look like, and what do we need to be doing as a community to get there? I think there's a number of ranges of answering that question depending on which way you come from. I think one of the things that I see a lot is it sometimes feels like it's a race. We have to race to get there, to get there, to get there. And we're starting to confuse the very people that we're trying to solve problems for. So many different blockchain systems, so many different ways of establishing a protocol, which I think is great. We've got to have heterogeneity in the community. But I think what we also have to be mindful of is that we still need to think about how I'll probably be a bit polemic here. I'm always a bit polemic. But I sort of see from our perspective is I think we have to get some consensus on the infrastructure, on the digital infrastructure layer, particularly if we're servicing so many sectors. Agriculture, for example, for some reason, agriculture in this country is the most analog, but we've seen so many companies create themselves to solve problems within the agriculture industry, but they don't coordinate or collaborate together. yet they're solving very similar problems. So I'd love to see blockchain companies that are within certain verticals to come together and collaborate and build together the digital infrastructure that can enable applications to be built on that are interoperable and synergistic. I would love to see that happen instead of competition, see collaboration on design. But thank you, Mutu, for the question.
Thank you again.